I'm Julie Rose. This is my story about my son Scott Rose. He was 28 when he sadly died of a heroin overdose. I would like to share some important points in my own story about Scott. I think someone going through this with a loved one will relate to my experiences. Stigma. I didn't care what people thought. I was going through hell. This is the hand I've been dealt, and I would play it to the best of my ability. I would look around at other parents with grown-up children and think, why are they so normal? Anyone else seemed to be living the dream with their offspring, either going off to university or thriving in their own chosen careers. What have they done that I hadn't? I would stare and watch them from the sidelines, appearing trouble-free. Well, that's how it seemed from the outside looking in, and again would say, why me? Unless you've gone through such an experience, it's hard to understand. It's a subject that's swept under the carpet, and unless it's your son or daughter, who really knows, who really wants to know about drugs in that ugly world? Overdose. Monday morning he got up saying he had to sort some things out and was keen to get back to work. His attitude was promising, and in the evening he was watching a video, so his mind was able to focus and was in good spirits. The following day, Tuesday, I dropped him into the town where he could persist in his search for work as he was a carpenter. I carried on to the office as I was doing a late start at 2 p.m. and finishing at 8 p.m. Not ideal, as I felt I needed to be around, but the bills had to be paid. All afternoon he was on my mind, and I had this nagging sense of doom by 4 o'clock. I called to check on his well-being. He reassured me he was fine and was eating pasta, but as the evening progressed, I couldn't settle and wanted to go home early, but had to see it through. When clocking off came around 8 p.m, I ran to my car, which was in the works car park, with a pounding heart. As I raced up to my driveway, the first thing I noticed was the curtains were open, and not only could you see in, but the brightness around the room was enough to make your eyes squint. I opened the door and walked into the living room, sensing emptiness, like there wasn't anything else in the room, until I looked down and saw Scott laying on his front on the floor. I knew it was serious, as I didn't get that feeling someone was present, the one you get when you can't see them, but instinct kicks in telling you that someone is there. I rolled him over in a state of panic and began shouting, "Scott, Scott, wake up, wake up." His face looked swollen and a fraction blue, so I immediately gave him mouth to mouth. But as there was no response, I started doing CPR. I had completed a first aid course in the past, so my training automatically came into force. I realised now why the room was so bright, as when he collapsed, he dragged the curtain and the rail down along with him. He must have been holding on to steady himself. My body went into overdrive and the adrenaline was flowing through my veins at an alarming rate, in between my actions of pumping his chest and giving mouth to mouth. I called for an ambulance and just kept going, trying to bring him round, as I was all alone. When I got no signs from him, I frantically ran out of the house into the street before making my way to the next door neighbours, Bob and Lynn. I whacked on their front door like a crazed animal, and as Bob opened it, I burst past him, going straight into the living room, shouting, "Help, Bob. Bob, it's Scott. I think he's taken an overdose, as he won't wake up." Bob ran into the house and got straight to work on his chest, but there was nothing. The paramedics arrived and started attaching wires to his chest, also applying the paddles several times for electric shocks to go into his body, but no response. They also tried lifting him up in an upright position, but when they did so, I could hear the fluid building up in his chest, and I knew that was not a good sign and maybe no way back. I sat on the stairs in the hallway after a while, just listening to everyone saying do this and do that. Then my brain went into a void like it wasn't real, and I was dreaming and not in my own body. At this point I froze as they prepared to take him to hospital in the ambulance and asked me to follow behind, which I managed God knows how. When I arrived, my friend Paul was ready there, waiting for me, and we were taken into a side room, which is when Paul made phone calls to inform the rest of my family. As they entered, they asked, "What's going on, Julie?" But I couldn't hear what anyone was saying. The police were waiting outside the room to question me, but I wasn't ready to deal with that. I just sat in a daze of nothingness. The nurse walked in and just looked at me. I stared back at her and said, Is he dead? And she said, yes, I'm sorry, Scott hasn't made it. We tried everything, but it was too late. The shock I felt was overwhelming, and all I could do was sit there and stare at the floor. That was it. It was all over. My only son dead due to drugs on the 5th of December 2006. My family didn't know how to react, and all I kept hearing in the background was, I'm sorry, but we wasn't going in. We both felt guilt, myself and my daughter Tilly, at not being there. Just goes to show the fact that you cannot leave them for a minute when they're freshly out of rehab, as it's when they're the most susceptible to risk and no tolerance. Their bodies are not usually able to withstand the amount they are accustomed to in the past, which they don't realise, hence the reason they overdose. If only I got back 10 or 15 minutes earlier, I might have been able to save him, as he didn't look like he had been there long, because his face and body wasn't too discoloured. Emotionally, as the weeks and months followed, I found it more and more difficult to get out of bed, as the only escape I had from the pain was sleep. My sleep hadn't been too badly disturbed, like it usually is when you experience a turmoil, as I was so exhausted mentally. However, when I woke up in the morning, reality hit me like a tornado, and I just wanted to go back to sleep as the pain was tearing through my body every waking minute. This routine went on intensely for 6 months, and all I was doing was getting up, going to the toilet, wash and eat toast. I would then return to bed to try and fall asleep, hopefully into a dream world where I might see Scott. I became obsessed with watching life after death programs on YouTube, as I was trying to identify if there really was such a thing. I'd always believed there was something more to life, perhaps to comfort me that Scott's spirit was still alive. Why would a young man going through life with all its trials and tribulations and then nothing? What was it all for? I was trying to find some meaning to it, because all I knew is that this person I loved so much had been ripped away from me. I didn't want to go out anywhere and face anyone, as the thought of having to talk to people was something I really dreaded. When I did eventually venture out of the house, I was met with mixed reactions. Some would say nothing at all, others would ask questions. I didn't have the energy to explain things. It only added to my pain, so I stuck to the closed-ended statement of, yes, I've lost my son, but I just don't want to talk about it right now. The concern from certain people was real, whereas some were just being plain nosy. Tilly was going through a similar thing to myself, but expressed her grief and anger and lost her temper at the slightest thing. I'm on my own now, an only child, she would say in a derogatory tone, hinting she blamed him for what he did and leaving us in this state. Again, I returned to sleep to blot things out, always wishing I wouldn't wake up, and because I was burdened with hurt for Tilly and her suffering, it was a double blow. I was called in to have a talk with the local vicar about my loss, which was the way of giving me support. He sat me down and said, what you've been through is something not all of us experience, and I can't imagine what it must be like. It sounded like an old cliche at first, as I heard that line so many times, with all of that good intentions. He then went on to mention the war days where mothers would wait anxiously for their sons to return home from battle. Only some would lose 2 or 3 sons in one family. This is tragic beyond belief, but it didn't register at the time, although it should have done, as I had lost my son, and that's all that mattered. However, as life went on, I could open my mind to other people's grief and identify with how they were feeling. The hope you look forward to and the healing. My employer for the last 24 years covered my long period off work. In these 12 months, aside from spending the majority of my time in bed, Tilly and I jetted out the country on different holidays around the Mediterranean. It was my outlet and a way of removing my mind and body from the pain all around me. As being in different surroundings de-intensified my grief. I received a call one day from 2 friends who had lost their brother to heroin. They asked me if I'd like to write a book about our experiences. At first I didn't feel strong enough, but after thought I decided it may be good for me. It was very hard and painful, but as time went on and during writing my story, it was making me stronger. It made me face up to what had happened and taught me not to hide away from that devastating time and poor Scott's demise. I also rekindled my passion for music from when I was at school playing violin. I was at basic level back then. However, at the age of 47, I took up the ABR-SM exams and passed up to grade 5 and since playing in orchestra. Exercise is another great help. It releases the anxiety in your mind. It will never go away, but it will help you find a way to manage the pain and the heaviness that you feel. Thank you.